Hello everyone, I am Jason Alcott. Welcome back to the channel. I am the author of The Sewing Principle. Very excited that you're here today. Thank you for diving in with me. I'm really excited because today we're going to dive into one of my favorite books. I know I say that all the time. It's called Essentialism by Greg Mckeown. It's one of those books where I just keep finding myself going back to it. When I've got a book like that, I know that there's things in there that are drawing me back to that book that I keep learning from, or things that I haven't learned yet and need to continue to work on. And so I love that when I get a book like that, and this is one of those books for me. Any of you, leave me a note in the comments. Do you have any books like that that are sit on your shelf or that are part of your library that you just keep coming back to? I'd love to know what it is, or books like that. Maybe it's multiples. And while you're down there leaving a note in the comments below, if you hadn't had a moment, please hit the subscribe button and help these videos get out there so that they can uplift and encourage other people like yourself. I really appreciate it. So when you pick up this book, Essentialism by Greg Mckeown, right inside the front dust jacket, there's this question: are you busy but not productive? And I'm like, oh, pick me. That's me. So many days. Young kids, business, work, family, life, everything going on. And it's like, yeah, I feel incredibly busy, but did I get it all to work on what matters most? Was I productive? Was I in pursuit of what God's calling me to? Was I able to, put in time and effort and energy into what I know I'm supposed to be maybe working on or creating or building or whatever it is, or investing? Maybe even it's just time in my family. And you dive right into the first chapter and he's like, bam. And he says, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. So if I don't not willing to kind of cut through the noise and cut through the clutter and cut through the busyness to prioritize what it is that I know that God's calling me to be working on, then someone else will prioritize my time. And that's just the nature of life. We're sold this idea that we can have whatever we want. And because we're sold that, we pursue everything. We just pursue it all because we think we can have it all. But he wants us to be able to move towards a more disciplined pursuit of less. So actually narrowing in and focusing. And I love that because I think that's what God's calling me to do. I think it's what God's calling you to do. It's not a Christian book per se, but I love grabbing this intersection between our personal growth and our spiritual growth and how those two things come together. All right, my number 3 takeaway from Greg Mckeown's book, Essentialism. He's got this chapter. It's called The Power of a Graceful No. There's always requests for our time, effort, and energy. That's always going to be the way it is. But by saying no, we're actually creating space. We're creating capacity to be able to work on what matters most. A yes is a commitment. A yes is an obligation. Now you got to follow through. You've given your word and whatever it is that you've committed to. But when we say yes to something, often it's at the request of someone else. And we say yes to something, meaning we're going to be saying no to something else. It might be no to sleep. It might be no to time with your family. It might be no to any of the things that you've identified as being the things that matter most in your values and how you're supposed to be investing your time. And I have to be the steward of that. That's my responsibility, right? If I don't prioritize my time, someone else will. It takes effort and it takes courage, because it means that if you're like me and sometimes you want to please people or please the people around you, you want to say yes because you don't want to offend people, that can be really dangerous and actually can detract from what you're supposed to be working on. And it isn't that you always have to justify our no. We don't always have to justify why we said no, but we need to stand in the conviction of knowing why we said no, right? Like why we said we weren't going to be able to volunteer for this or commit to that, whatever those things are. But the power of a graceful no is so powerful because it opens up our capacity and it opens up our ability to sow our time, effort, and energy into what matters most. My number 2 takeaway from Greg's book, Essentialism, is this chapter entitled Protect the Asset. What's the asset? You're the asset. When we get worn down, if we're unable to make good decisions, then all of a sudden the impact is all over our life, right? But we have to be able to find ways to protect the asset. That's taking care of our mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. I talked in a video a while ago about decision fatigue, and Greg says in his book, our greatest priority is to protect our ability to prioritize. When we are worn down, when we're exhausted, when we're facing that kind of burnout, we can't make decisions properly. I know when I'm exhausted. I know when I'm on edge or stressed out, and that filters through and it comes out with my family, and it happens more often than I'd like to admit. But it breaks my heart because I know I'm not protecting myself. I'm not giving myself the opportunity to be at my best when I'm with my family, or be at my best when I'm in that situation with coworkers or with the team that I'm trying to support. I'm reading this great book called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And I've only just started it, and maybe we'll talk about it on one of the videos. And in that book, the author talks about the verses where Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. And I've always looked at that as an encouragement to make sure that I am taking care of other people. But the author said, absolutely, that's what the verse is about. But it also says, love your neighbor as yourself, which means that how do you treat yourself? If you're treating yourself poorly, if you're dealing with negative self-talk, if you're not taking care of your physical body, if you're not eating properly, you wouldn't do that to your neighbor. You wouldn't do that to someone else. I wouldn't do that to someone else. There are some days where I put myself through things that I would never put anyone else through. But I put myself through, total lack of sleep, and I eat the wrong things, and I don't get any physical activity, and I pollute my brain, or whatever it is, and I would never do that to someone else, right? But we do it to ourselves. How can you take a moment to make sure that you're aware of what you've got going on, aware of what's coming up, and make sure that you're protected and protecting your ability to prioritize? I love that takeaway from this book. My number one takeaway from Greg Mckeown's book is the chapter entitled The Invincible Power of Choice. And I love this because it's what we all have. It's that moment of, I have to get to work versus I get to go to work tomorrow. All of a sudden we're not choosing. So someone else is now prioritizing my life because I tell myself that I have to go to work tomorrow. That means I'm allowing someone else to prioritize my life. When I use that language, when I'm allowing that mindset to permeate my life, all of a sudden I'm developing this sort of helplessness, and it starts to fade away. It eats away at my hope for the future, and it eats away at who I am as a person. So I find myself, when I think about this chapter and this invincible power of choice, I've kind of got two paths. I'm either going to continue to think and recognize the power of choice that is in front of me, or I'm going to let go of that power of choice and allow other people to make choices for me. And I sort of learn and start to create this repetitious behavior of helplessness. I love the saying, that hope for the future is power in the present. But what happens if we lose that hope? When we're in the present and it's difficult and we're facing a challenging situation, the hope, that future, it gets cloudy. One of the best ways to get back to getting to a point of having hope for the future is to get back to that core idea, recognizing we have that invincible power of choice. I will always have the choice of how I'm going to show up in the next minute, in the next 15 minutes, in the next time that I get to spend with my family, in how I show up into my work situation, and how do I support my team. I've always got the choice. I don't always get to choose what happens to me, but I always get the opportunity to choose how I will respond, how I will react in those situations. I get that opportunity. So I love this chapter. I find it incredibly encouraging. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you get the opportunity to love it, share it, get it out there, and let it encourage other people. If you haven't got a copy of Essentialism, we'll put a link in the show notes. It's another one of those books. I think you need to have it in your library. Grab a copy. Have an absolutely awesome rest of your day, and I look forward to sharing with you again next week.